Oh, where's my... Okay. Alex, are we live? Okay, and we are live. Welcome everyone to another Street Entrepreneurs Workshop. Today we're talking with Steve Cadigan about making culture your competitive advantage. Steve is a thought leader untangling the fear of the future of work. He brings hope in a time when most of us fear a robot invasion or whatever 2020 will bring next. Thank you, Steve, for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me, Julian. So glad to be here.
Awesome. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Me too.
So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing your PowerPoint, and you can feel free to start whenever you like.
Okay, thanks, Juliana, and welcome everybody. I am hopefully going to entertain you and fill your brain with different ideas around this notion of culture for the next 45 minutes or so, and then we're going to take questions. If we cover something that's of particular interest to you, don't hesitate to ask the question, and we'll receive it and hopefully get to most of the questions by the end. So if you have a question during the session, please raise it, and we're going to try to get to it near the end. So I'd rethought about naming this talk a little bit differently than making culture your competitive advantage to something more akin to like making culture your, hang on here, make sure I got the right tab open, something more akin to the miracle drug for success. But let's start with a little bit of context, because I'm a high context person, and for you to sort of understand where I'm coming from, you might want to know a little bit about my background and how I see the world. So born in the US, at the age of 2, went to South Africa. My family, my parents wanted an adventure. So for the next 5 years of my life, I was in South Africa. We came back when I was 7 to the United States, and I was raised mostly on the East Coast in Connecticut, right on the New York border in Danbury, Connecticut. Finished school there, drove to California the day I graduated, and I've mostly been in California the rest of my career, except for 2 years that I worked in Singapore and 4 years that I worked in Vancouver, British Columbia. So I have 3 kids. All of them were born outside the US, and apparently I only make boys. So I have one son who was born in Singapore, and I have a pair of twins who were Canadians. This is the list of companies that I have worked for in my life. So full disclosure, before we start getting into the guts of culture, I am not someone who's ever started a company from nothing. Yes, I have my own business today, but it's a low risk business because I started it pretty much as a retirement business when I finished my regular day job. I've mostly worked in big companies, as you can see, but I've worked in 6 different industries, from fashion, insurance, semiconductor, networking, back to semiconductor. I had a short venture in the video games industry at Electronic Arts, which is great because you can play video games at home guilt-free. And I was the first head of human resources for LinkedIn. And that's probably going to be a big part of the story I want to share with you today, is my first experience building a culture. Most of my life, most of my professional life, I have been in organizations helping change, modify, adjust cultures that were built before I got there. And so many of you sit on the doorstep of opportunity where you have an organization that's relatively new and you have soft clay in your hands. And so in all these jobs that I've had, I've worked in a function which in bigger companies is known as human resources, or in some companies, the evil HR department. But I've been a hugely passionate person around helping people and teams and organizations be the best they can be. And culture is a huge part of that. So as I said, my last regular job, I was the first head of human resources at LinkedIn. And I'll tell you a little bit about that story later, but I was there from 400 employees to 4,000, from 2 offices to 26, and from 2 countries to 17. I joined a university in Madrid, Spain a few years ago called ISDI. It's a digital university, and I'm a member of that university today, helping them design curriculum for the digital economy that we all work in today. And then when I left LinkedIn about 10 years ago, I founded my own company called Cadigan Talent Ventures. And I'm based here in Silicon Valley right now, which we've renamed Smokeville. But today, as I was telling Juliana a few minutes ago, it's the first day where we actually have healthy air in 2 months, which is great. In my role today, I happen to have the great privilege of working with many really interesting clients, some big that you may recognize on this slide here, and some you may never have heard of, and I never have heard of before. I also am an advisor to some companies, and I sit on the board of directors to 3 organizations, 2 startups and 1 public company. You can see on the right-hand side there, the public company being Perk Labs, which is a Canadian company. In the payments industry, Certain is a company in the background check company, and Giroux Glass is in the artistic glass construction industry. So that's a little bit about my background, so you can kind of get a sense of where I'm coming from when I look at this. But we can't have a talk about culture if we don't ask the first question, which usually trips all of us up, and that is, well, what the heck is culture anyway? And I think one of the really interesting dynamics around this topic is that we all have a different version of what our answer is to this question. And the truth is, there is no right answer to this question. And also, there is no such thing as the perfect culture that works in every organization. It varies. Different cultures work with different sets of people. That's just the truth. But some people, when they think about this, I like to ask, when you think about this, well, who owns the culture in your organization? Who's responsible for building that? And how do you know culture when you see it, right? And what's the difference between company values, which a lot of organizations like to talk about, and company culture? And another big question I like to ask people to think about is, should your culture, your organization culture, be right for everyone? Because this is where I see a lot of people trip up. My answer is no, it shouldn't be right for everyone, because not everyone's right for your company, and you don't want to hire everyone. And so sometimes when we're getting started in the early phases of organization, and I work with a lot of entrepreneurs, they have this false notion, I believe, that everyone should want to work here. Now that is, I think, their passion talking, that everyone should love what they're doing. And that's not anything I would ever want to smother in you or them. But the truth is, not everyone is a right fit for you based on what they need in an organizational experience, or what they need in a career, or what they need in a job. Okay, common definitions of culture that I come across are things like, well, culture is who you hire, who you fire, and who you promote. And I do believe that a lot of people that work in your organization will get a sense for what's important based on who's being hired, the attributes of those people that you're hiring, who you're letting go, what behaviors you're not tolerating, and also who's getting more attention, who's getting more responsibility, and who's growing, quote unquote, with promotions, tells a lot of the story of what you value in your organization. Other definitions I've heard about culture are things like how work gets done around here, the norms and the behavior that we find acceptable for us to work together and to produce something of value. But I like to look at it in very simplistic terms. I'm a pretty simple person, and I look at culture as more something around, culture is the environment we create so that people and organizations can realize their ultimate success. People can do their best work, and therefore the organization can realize its ultimate possible destiny, okay? But again, you may have a better definition. If it works for you, great. And so one of the things that I find, having spoken about this topic in organizations around the world, at conferences around the world, is that this is a really challenging topic for some people. And that is because for a bunch of reasons. Well, first off, we have trouble defining it, and we have trouble agreeing on what it is, even in our organization. And another dimension is that culture is never static. It's organic. It's a part of who we are. As human beings, we are changing every second. We're growing. We're adjusting. We're learning new things. We're different people from when we started the company to a couple months in. So it's not something that can, be bolted down and not change. It doesn't make sense. If we're all changing, we need our culture to be one that also moves and changes with us. And that feels uncomfortable for those people who are like, no, we want to define what it is. Well, we can define pillars, but they better be pillars that can change over time. I also think that some people worry when they try to define what culture is and look at this topic as challenging is because they fear a loss of control. We have the wrong culture, bad things can happen. And maybe that's a real fear for some people. And the other thing is, there's this whole yin yang of, in an organization, you want freedom for people to do their best stuff, but you also need a certain amount of structure. So I was having a great conversation just the other week with an entrepreneur. And I said, well, what kind of culture do you want in your business? They're very early stage. And they said, well, I want one where everyone has the ultimate freedom to do their job any way they want to. And so I asked them, well, what if two people start doing the same thing and they're not communicating? Or they're working on something in parallel and it's going to be organizationally inefficient, but you've just now given them the ultimate freedom. Where does shared accountability come in? And where are we going to be able to have the organization figure out how we're going to avoid redundancies, for example? Okay, so you give ultimate freedom, that could be taken in lots of different ways. So anyway, it's not an easy topic. And again, I have a perspective. I think I have had a reasonably good experience with my, helping grow certain cultures and helping adjust. But again, the most important thing I think is that you have to find a culture that fits you and your team and your organization that you feel good about. And please, 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 if you are not sold on culture, if you think culture is not that important and doesn't need to be a competitive advantage, please don't tell your team you think it's important. Because the worst thing you could do was talk about how important culture is and come up with all these guidelines and pillars of your culture, and then you behave differently. Because then it's worse than if you did nothing at all. So if you really care about it, if you really believe this is a differentiator, and I think that you do, otherwise you wouldn't be here today, I think there's ways that we can leverage culture. And I learned from my LinkedIn experience that we can leverage culture to unlock enormous power and magic in an organization. But here's the biggest false assumption that I think people have around culture when they're thinking about it, and that is that it's perks. It's the foosball, it's beer Fridays, it's ping pong table, it's the espresso machine. That's not culture. Those are indications of what your work environment is like. And they're signs that you show the outside world or people that you may want to hire that you like to have fun. Okay, great. But that's not culture. And this is where I think Silicon Valley has really tripped up the rest of the world because of the arms race for talent, created this, what I call the perks arms race, where everyone had to have a sushi chef, or we had to have a daycare center, or we have to have LeBron James coming in, or we have to have Drake singing at the company picnic. Like, come on now. That's not culture. That's just an arms race for attention. So be very, very careful here not to confuse this stuff. This picture here, this is not culture. These are attributes of your work environment. And maybe they indicate part of it, but don't get confused. All right, so when I think about what culture I would want to build today, if I'm in your shoes and I'm starting to build a company, I think the first thing that I want to do is say, well, what's the work environment like? What's the business environment like for me to think about how I'm going to differentiate my place from all the choices that everyone has to go to work in? And the best quote that I have to start to talk about this is this quote here from Reid Hoffman, chairman and founder of LinkedIn. Had a chance to sit a couple of doors down from him for about 4 years at LinkedIn. And one day he was asked this question, and his answer, I think, is really great. Someone said, hey, Reid, who's your biggest competitor? Who keeps you up at night? And his answer captures it so well. Reid said, I'm more concerned about the company that hasn't started yet than one that exists today. And that, I think, describes the world that we live in today, which is, it's not just, you shouldn't just be concerned about what the competitive landscape is of companies that exist. You should also be concerned about someone building a paradigm that could obsolete your business model out of nowhere. And so if that's a concern, if this is a reality, and it is, look at all the unicorns, look at all the disruptions that have happened in many, many of the organizations that we all talk about, the Airbnbs, the Ubers, the Lyfts of the world that have changed business models seemingly overnight. How does that make us think differently about the people we want in an organization or the kind of business that we're in. Because when I read something like this, and I believe this is to be true, I think I need an organization that can move quickly, that is very agile, that's very adaptable to a highly dynamic, highly globally competitive work environment. So when I'm looking at people today and I'm helping people build what are the attributes of key people that you should be hiring, the first and most important thing is, can this person learn new things quickly, and are they able to adapt? Because we know whatever business we're in, it's going to be different tomorrow, it's going to be different next month. That's why I'm not a big believer in job descriptions, because as soon as you write one, it almost becomes obsolete. Now, this book here is called Built to Last. For those of you that haven't read it or may not have heard about it, it's the best-selling book on leadership that's ever been published. And the core thesis of this book is that to build a company to last, to build a 100-year company, you need to teach people how to fish. You can't show them, you can't fish for them, okay? I think that's a great aspiration. This book was published in the 90s, and it sold more, as I said, than any leadership book in history. But I want to ask you something and just have you reflect on it for a second here. How many of you are building an organization today with the intention of it lasting 100 years? Is that how you're thinking about your decisions? Now, I'm not saying that you should. I'm just saying, how many of you are thinking like that? Because when I look around my neighborhood over here in Silicon Valley, I can only list a couple that I think are really building a business to last 100 years. And I'm not saying that's because everyone else is not as wise or not as astute. I think the reality is that today you got to think about surviving. Look what Reid Hoffman said just 2 slides ago. I'm worried about a company that hasn't been invented yet upsetting my business model. So I think if these guys were to write this book today, and Collins and Poor's really, really smart people, and this book is worth the read, but if they were to publish this today, I think they would change the title from Built to Last to Built to Win Now. I need to win right now because someone can come and knock me off quickly. So that, I think, goes to what kind of cultures we want are ones that can move quickly, that can learn quickly, where information flows really, really well, where people don't have to wait for management to make the decision, where decision is pushed down. And so I think that's a powerful asset to think about when you're thinking about your culture. So let me give you an example, someone who's done a little bit of work with Eventbrite. I was an advisor there for a couple of years. Here's Julia Hartz, super, super interesting person, built a company some of you may have heard called Eventbrite. Their world went upside down when gatherings and events of people more than 2 or 3 sort of became banned on a global level. Think about how hard her business pivot has had to become. But when she was building her company, she started out with this model like, I want to be the place where people just have a great time, where they just love what they do. And over a couple of years, as the business started to grow and they started to reach a few hundred employees, the business performance started to struggle a little bit. And Julia woke up one night in a cold sweat and she said, I had a culture nightmare. That I woke up and I said, I have created the happiest, most mediocre company ever. And so she really started to struggle with this. Like they had their, karaoke night and beer Friday, and they had, dress up like Goofy Day and wear your pajamas and all these fun things, but the company wasn't performing. And so she's like, she got caught up in the perks arm race, just like a lot of us have, trying to compete for talent here in Silicon Valley. So she started to think differently about it. And she started to realize, after talking to many people in her organization, what really motivated people more than anything, more than the perks, more than the beer Friday, more than all those attributes, was being on a high-performing team. That's what got people jazzed. We're winning. We're making something the customer loves. We're making something that makes a difference in people's lives. That started to get people excited, and that started to raise the belief and the joy of working on her team. That was greater than all the free food, sushi chefs, cruises on the bay, than anything else. I think this is a really great lesson. If you want to find, you can look up the talk she gave. I found it on YouTube. It's really, really fascinating. But here's another really interesting thing she said, back to the earlier point I made around the organic nature of cultures. What she said was, I want to grow a culture that's sustainable and never stops evolving. Think about that. How do you grow something and build something, a culture that's always evolving, And so I think my story that I'm going to share with you on LinkedIn is going to help answer some of that. Here's a photo that was taken on Wall Street, right in front of the New York Stock Exchange. I took it with my mobile phone the day we went public on May 11th in 2011. Incredible day for me. I've never been a part of going public, if you will. It was always a dream of mine in my professional career. And I got to go and sit in the New York Stock Exchange in that bell tower and open the day of trading the day we went public. An incredible, incredible experience. And so let me tell you a little about that story, starting with the end point. In just under 9 years, LinkedIn became valued at around $26 billion. Microsoft acquired them. The time that I was there, the average tenure of my employees was only 9 months. That was the average tenure that people were actually there, because we're doubling the size every year. 400 to 1,000 the first year, 1,000 to 2 the next year, and 2 to 4 the next year. Unbelievable. And so everyone's just all new. And so that challenge of doubling revenue while doubling your size of the organization is incredibly, incredibly complex. Because it's not just growing people. You're growing in different countries, different time zones, different country cultures, different microcultures on top of your corporate culture. Super, super complicated. And I'm fortunate I still have a head of hair. I lost most of my dark hair in the process, but it was pretty incredible adventures, as I mentioned to you, growing in some of these countries. It's not linear growth. It's like exponential growth. And really doubling revenues every year when everyone just got here. I think one of the biggest things we solved for in this was like, how do you actually build revenue when all your managers are doing is hiring people all the time? I mean, doubling your staff every year requires a lot of effort. And we didn't have a very big recruiting team. And we're still recognized for the last 20 years, one of the highest performing IPOs as measured by stock performance. So share price that when I was there went from $350 to $267 a share. As I said, it was sold to Microsoft. And for me, this was kind of an adventure of a lifetime. Nothing like I thought it was going to be. And I thought, having come from big companies, well, how hard can it be to like grow a culture? Well, it turns out really, 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 really hard. And way more complex than I thought. And here's one of the ironies of the adventure that I had at LinkedIn, which was the biggest challenge that we had as a company in the early days. And I joined LinkedIn when we were probably about 6 years old. So unlike you, many who started when it was a minute old because it was your idea and it's your company, the biggest challenge, ironically, was that our biggest organizational challenge was recruiting, trying to hire and differentiate ourselves in an environment where all these sexy brands were also recruiting, paying more money, had greater benefits, had sexier campuses, had buses from San Francisco that were shuttling their people to Silicon Valley. We had none of those things. But also, I was not sexy. We were a boring, old, tired looking on the outside professional network. I mean, think back to 2009. Many of you probably never even heard of LinkedIn at that point. And so it was not, we weren't known. And, the big $1 billion question that we had to solve was, as I mentioned earlier, how do you build a company when everyone's recruiting and double revenues? And how do you avoid suffocating from the weight of all that success? Because every time you grow, you need new processes and new procedures, and you need new ways of coordinating, communicating. Super, super hard. So if you can build at the early foundation levels of your organizations ways that allow you to scale, this will really help. Okay? If you can think big, expect some of the success. But here's something that I want to share with you, and I hope this is the most hopeful method or hopeful message I could leave with you today. The irony of LinkedIn's success is that if you're an investor in 2011 and you're determining, should I bet on LinkedIn being successful, or even go back to 2009, do they have the pedigree, the talent, the leadership to become a world-class organization? You would have said, looking at all the facts, nope, they don't. Yes, they have Reid Hoffman. He is a human hurricane force in nature, incredibly successful man. But he's the chairman. Our CEO had never been a CEO before, Jeff Weiner, first time being a CEO. And every single person, head of sales, engineering, product, marketing, PR, recruiting, human resources, none of us had ever taken a company public before. None of us had ever been in the recruiting business. I'd done more recruiting than most people on the executive team, but no one had ever been in that industry. none of our competitors for talent. And there was no direct competitor for us, by the way. I mean, Facebook, we thought might be a competitor. We thought Salesforce might be a competitor. We thought Cisco, when they started their campaign where the human network might be a competitor. We didn't know. We thought Twitter might be a competitor. We didn't know. But we're still young. But if you looked on paper, there's no reason to think that this was a layup, no-brainer, going to be a success. And the product, by the way, the company business, way more complex than Facebook's or Google's, whose primary revenue comes from ad sales. Most of our revenue came from selling a subscription recruiting license, not from marketing ourselves. And still to this day, the preponderance of the revenue from LinkedIn comes from recruiting, doesn't come from marketing. So not as easy a business for us. And so to give you a sense of the challenges that we faced in the early days, to recruit, and we were not successful, very successful recruiting in the early days. That red star that you see over there, that was our headquarters. This is a Google satellite shot of Mountain View, California. And I don't know if you recognize any of these companies, but this was my neighborhood. Okay. I don't know how many of you have ever tried to recruit when that monster is surrounding you, but right up the freeway there was sexy Facebook and Twitter as well. And in the early days, we weren't effective at recruiting. We tried everything. I mean, everything that you could think of to try to get people to join us. Job fairs, sourcing, pizza parties, recruiting bonuses, referral bonuses, hired more recruiters, getting signing bonuses. We had brainstorming sessions with our board of directors, marketing campaigns, did everything. Still, we couldn't get people to join us at the rate we needed to scale our business. And in 2010, we hit this ironic inflection point where, the irony of our biggest business was recruiting and the lowest performing function in the company was recruiting people. And if the customers found out about that, that would not go very well. And I'd probably lose my job, and so would a bunch of other people. But so this was like, failure is not an option here. We're LinkedIn. We got to own this. Okay. I'm starting to have like flashbacks and start to shiver like I was back in the day just talking about it now. But we hit a point of significant stress because of our inability to hire people. And this is all germane to the culture discussion because it landed on culture being the reason how we got our way through it. So I'm just building up to that right now. And that's why it's important for you to understand the backdrop. We thought great product, great people, great investors. Yeah, A round, B round, C round investors going really well. We hit a super crazy inflection point where the job market started to really heat up, and Google and Facebook got into an arms race and they started doing $1 million counteroffers to each other. And it was insane, like insane. The joke inside Google was just get an offer from Facebook and Google will double your salary. Even if you don't want to go, just go get an offer. It was that kind of craziness. Meanwhile, our offer declines was rising, not declining. So we were getting pretty stressed out because we had really ambitious plans, but we couldn't act on those plans because we didn't have the people to do it. So we finally we faced these big questions that really helped us answer and unlock our ability to be successful in the world of recruiting and growing an organization. And these are questions that I really think if you haven't asked, you should definitely ask, because these are the keys to unlocking your culture. Question number one, why would someone want to work here? Okay, now you may think, Steve, that's the best you got? Like I made time here in the middle of my day to sort of see this webinar. Why would someone want to work here? Yes. Why does someone want to work here? We all think, oh, someone wants to work here because we're sexy, we're cool, we got a great product, we're changing the world, we got great investors, we're going to make a lot of money, we're nice to work with, we're all good people. Guess what? Everyone says that. Everyone. So what's unique above and beyond that? And so that gets to question number two. What assets do we have to attract people? Do we have a tech luminary? Are we solving something that no one else in the world is solving, something so complex it's never been solved before that matters? What is it that's unique about it? You have it. You may not think you do. But start with these two simple questions and it will help you unlock, well, who are you? It's sort of like an identification of who you are as an organization, who you are as a people. What's the fabric? Why does someone want to work here? And so when we started to ask these questions, and this was like a 4-hour evening session with the executive team and the board of directors, and we're like, we cannot go any longer without solving this recruiting problem. We finally answered it. We said people We are solving something more important than Google, Facebook, Twitter, Zynga, Groupon. They're solving. We're helping people find their dream jobs. We're helping the children of our members ultimately be able to find their dream jobs. Do you want to help solve that problem? Or do you want to go over at Google and buff the trophies of all the engineers that built something before you, be engineer number 7,000? Or do you want to be engineer number 20 over here at LinkedIn and put your fingerprints on the code of changing the world? I don't know. Do you want to go to Facebook and help kids develop their short attention span capability and not do their homework? Sure. Or do you want to help people find their dream jobs? I don't know. What do you want to do? And so we start to see we got a problem that matters to the world. That was anchoring for us. Okay. That allows us to fill our story beyond we're cool, we're sexy, we've got a lot of good investors, we're going to make a lot of money, we've got a good work environment. No, we're solving something that matters. Meaning matters. What are you doing that's meaningful? You need to get real clear about that, and you need to be clear about that in your messaging when you're thinking about recruiting. And then we start to say, well, what assets do we have? Do we have a tech luminary? That's what technical talent wants. They want to grow and learn and work on cool stuff and change the world. So we looked around the room. Does anyone know a tech luminary? Or do we have a tech luminary in the company? And everyone's like, no, we don't. Okay, does anyone know a tech luminary? And one person raised their hands like, yeah, I know James Gosling. And so I go, the Canadian actor? Like, what do we need a Canadian actor? They said, no, that's Ryan Gosling. James Gosling happens to be the founder of Java. And every Friday hangs out at the bar outside of our organization at the corner. Why don't we invite him here so he can hang out and share with our engineers what his thinking is about the future? And so we started to get creative about that to try to find different ways of getting the mind share so that when James Gosling was over on Fridays, all the engineers from Google and all the buildings around us would want to come to our building and see what's going down. And it almost got to the point at LinkedIn where we would measure our success on a Friday by how many Google bikes were left in our parking lot at the end of the week, because the security pickup truck would always come up and pick them up. But this was a defining moment for us. Don't get me wrong. Like I really believe a lot in culture, but I'm not a big believer in culture posters or badges that say, oh, customer first, honesty and integrity, get results. I don't believe that. I believe culture has to start right here in your heart and has to be connected to your mind. You got to believe it in your soul, in your gut. And don't make it up. Don't feel like it has to be some architected, academic exercise. You have to feel it. And if there's not harmony between what you really feel and believe, when you talk about it, people will know. And so we were trying to figure out, well, what's our culture? What's our culture? Why does someone want to work here? We came up with 2 words, career transformation. And this is the really interesting thing about career transformation. These 2 words were the same 2 words for what our members receive from us and what our employees receive from us. Why would you want to work here? Because we're going to help people with their career transformation. Why do you want to work here? Because being an employee here will be transformative for your career transformation. We try to come up with all kinds of definitions of our culture, and then we would quiz ourselves and we would forget what they were. But these 2 words, and when you have alignment between what your customer value prop is and your employee value prop is, and they're the same thing, it's really powerful because it's easy to remember. You don't have to study it. If you have to study what your culture is that you wrote down in some weekend retreat that you had with your leadership team, then it's not right. It's got to be right there, right forefront of your mind. Okay, I'm getting excited here. All right, so what did we do to make LinkedIn the best place you ever worked? What we did was we started to say, we're going to create career experiences. I want to give you 2 stories because they typify how we thought about this. And again, some of you are a lot smaller than 400 when we started doing this stuff, but I want you to see the arc of the whole method of how we got to where we got to. Experiences matter. Michael Nguyen was in accounting, and he every weekend had a hot dog diner truck that he and his family did, and all he did was talk about the relishes that they made on the weekends. Well, one day we were big enough that we needed a food program inside the company, and we needed someone to manage it. So we went to Michael and said, hey, we know you love your food. We also know you love accounting, but would you like to change your job from an accountant to become someone who runs our food program? He couldn't believe that we would ask him to do that. He didn't even blink. He said, absolutely. He goes, what's my job title? We said, I don't know. What do you want it to be? He says, I want you to call me the food guy. And so we said, fine, Michael, you can be the food guy. What do you think he did when we did that? He tweeted the heck out of it. He told all his friends about it, and poof, amplification. Career transformations happening. Catherine Porter is another great example. Incredibly successful business development specialist in her organization. One day overhears a discussion in a conference room next to her that says, "Hey, we're thinking about getting into Japan." And so she goes, knock, knock. "Hey, can I help on this project?" And they say, "Hey, Catherine, nice to meet you. Actually, we're good. We got a lot of people in this project." She said, "No." She says, "I'm really interested. And by the way, I'm fluent in Japanese." And they said, "What? You are?" And she says, "Yeah, it's on my LinkedIn profile." So that happened a lot, by the way. She became, after a few weeks of discussion, the acting country manager of Japan. So let me ask you, what impact do you think it had in our company and beyond when we put a woman in charge of our company development in a highly male-dominated society like Japan? Yeah, it went crazy. People were jacked. And by the way, this was a dream of hers to work in Japan. Her parents had taken her to Japan when she was a child. That's where she learned how to become bilingual, and she wanted the same opportunity for her children. Wow. And she went crazy on social media when that happened. But we did a lot of things that were building trust during these days. We had a whole teaching series where we had all our executive teams teaching things. We had every company meeting, and every announcement that we made in the company was never on email. It was always live. We tried to keep it very real. We did a lot of pulsing. We did a lot of asking people, what can we do to make it better? And we created one day a month where you could work on anything that you wanted. Our hope was that LinkedIn was going to become the best job that you ever had. And so as we started to do these things, the tide began to shift. People started to see, I'm not coming there for just a career path. I'm coming there for career bursts and new experiences. And maybe I don't take a whole new job like the food guy, but maybe I go work on a project in Australia for 2 months. And we started bringing in speakers from the outside, the James Goslings of the world, Deepak Chopra, Susie Orman. I mean, I could go on and on, just amazing, mind-blowing people, philanthropists, business leaders, military leaders, people from all over the world. It was really, really phenomenal. And so we got so aggro on recruiting, we actually broke the recruiting process into 300 steps. That's how aggro we got. We measured everything. And the tide started to shift. People started to really see we were serious and we had game. And we asked people the most important question that I would encourage you to ask to understand whether you're building something that really matters. And that is what I call the Employee Net Promoter Score, ENPS. Would you recommend this company to your friends? And for those of you that aren't familiar with the Net Promoter Score, anything over 70 is world-class. And anything above 5 is really, really good. And we sat in the high 50s and 60s most of the time that I was there. So pretty darn close to world class, which for such a crazy environment, super, super proud of. And Apple, for those of you that don't know, averages like low 70s is a company with a high net promoter score. Anyway, we turned the tide. We were so effective at recruiting because we got religion around our culture, making it the best place anyone could ever work, that Morgan Stanley identified us as doing such a great job. They raised our stock target. I think my recruiters that day grew 3 inches. And I used this article that was put on Business Insider as my performance review with my boss the year this came out. When it came time for me to say, how did I do? I just printed the article and go, there you go, which was the shortest performance review of my life. Now, many of you are just getting started or in the early phases of building your business. And I want to offer you some more encouragement beyond just what I said around our leadership team at LinkedIn had no business becoming world-class. You don't have to have experience being world-class to be world-class. In some cases, I believe that we were able to be successful building this culture because none of us had ever done it before. And all we knew is we wanted to build something really special that no one else had done before. Yeah, I wanted to kick Google's ass and Facebook's ass in recruiting. But more than that, I wanted this to be the best career experience that anyone had ever had. And that was the most important objective I had in whatever I was building or contributing in my role as the first head of human resources over there. But something interesting I want to show you when we look at some of the most revered, most highly valued technology companies, most of whom I think on this slide are US-based. Look at the median tenure of how long people are staying in these companies, okay? Less than 2 years, almost all of them, save for Facebook. All these companies growing or hiring tons and tons of people. So that median tenure. So a lot of folks think, boy, you need to, for you to build a company that lasts, you need people to stay a long time. This data would suggest not necessarily the case when you're innovating, and that new ideas and people coming in is a really, really important feature. And that may be intimidating to you as it was to me when you're thinking, well, how do we preserve our culture when all these new people are coming in? And the way I think about it, the way I'd encourage you to think about it is invite those people to help you make the culture better. If some people begin their new hire orientation with saying, well, here's the culture, read up. Where we got to at LinkedIn was, okay, our orientation is going to be in two parts, week 1 and week 4. Week 1, we're going to tell you everything about the company, how you can be successful and how you can ramp up quickly. And then week 4, you come back and tell us what the culture is. What are you seeing? You tell us based on your experience what it is. And here's the thing, and I'll tell you later in this presentation that I really believe, especially in the younger generations that are entering the workforce for the first time or early in their career, say the first 5 years. They don't want to be told what the culture is. They want to be told and invited to help you build the culture. So are you doing that? Or are you a founder that says, no, it's got to be my way or the highway? Are you saying, I think this is the right way, but hey, if you got a better way or you got a better idea, please let me know. I want this to be great, and I know that I don't have all the right answers. So what culture is right for your organization? I can't tell you that. There's tons of organizations, best company to work for this, best culture over here. I mean, every journal that you can think of, every social media site, Glassdoor's got theirs, LinkedIn's got theirs. There's a whole organization called Great Place to Work even. I don't put a lot of stock in those, honestly, and I'm not telling you go out and become the best, culture, the best place to work for, but just be aware of the fact that there's different kinds of options and different kinds of ways that you can do this. There's no one right way. You got to do it in the way that you feel good about. And so what culture is right for your organization? I think these are the ingredients that inform that, okay? Elements of transparency, community, trust, inviting people to build, connect, and find meaning. Those, I think, somewhere need to fit into how you think about what's right for you. The other thing I will say on this is that if you haven't gotten real formal in your thinking about culture, I do want to let you know that if you have 2 or 3 employees, you already have a culture because you've already started to determine what time you come in, how you dress, how you communicate, what information gets shared, what doesn't get shared. You've also determined, and this is a really interesting one, which I had a conversation about the other day with somebody, which is your email IDs. Are you using first name at we'reacoolcompany.com or are you using first initial last name? So let's say Susan is the first employee and the founder of her company. If she does Susan at mycoolcompany.com, what's the next Susan that Susan hires? What's her email going to be? Can't be Susan. It's going to be probably s.last name at susanshotcompany.com. And so now when everyone's emailing second Susan, they're going to know, oh, well, she got here later. She wasn't here early. And now you've got a identifiable difference of when someone got there. And I've seen that stratification cause friction or cause like we were here first, you got here later, we're more entitled than you are kind of stuff. So be careful of being aware of all the little things you're doing now that are already building your culture. Okay, getting up to near the end of my presentation. Last couple of slides here. Please, 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 please. I am not telling you build your culture like LinkedIn's. I'm not. I'm telling you we found a way to make it our competitive advantage. Now, I see busloads of people every day in Silicon Valley pre-COVID, maybe they'll come back, wanting to benchmark. Google is notorious for having hundreds of buses, hundreds every day come to their campus. People want to know what's the secret sauce, what's the secret sauce. And I tell them listen, you're not Google, you're not Facebook. Look at what they're doing, but you're not in their business. You don't have their employees. You don't have their founders. You don't have the same, demographics that they have. Take a look at how they got to what they got to and borrow and utilize pieces that fit for you or make it your way. Okay, like I said, if you are coming up with a culture because Netflix said this or Google said that or Disney this or Apple that, and it's not yours, people are going to know that. And you're gonna hit a point of friction. Like, what do we do? I don't know. What did Steve Jobs do in this situation? Well, that's going to slow you down. and people are going to know it's not authentic. So build it in your own way and make it part of your secret sauce and make it special. And I think, like I said, I really think people want to build a culture today and not necessarily be told what it is. So last final slide here, and some musings for you I have on it. Kind of a summary slide. Culture's always evolving. It's never static. Everyone owns the culture. How you address failure as a company sometimes, when someone goofs up, and how you respond is a big tell to what your culture is, okay? And please don't, like I said, don't care about this. If someone told you it's important, and so you have to build a culture because someone else said it's important. Like, if you don't really get it, please don't try to build your culture, okay? A culture easily understood is a beautiful thing. Don't get tangled up in building a poster or a badge. Like, build the culture that you know it easily, okay? And you can express it really simply. And it's not about perks. And like I said, Silicon Valley, we've done a lot of great things, but we really messed up and confused what a culture really can be and how it can be. And I think if I'm you, COVID-19 has really served to emphasize the fact that most important cultures today, the ones that the companies and individuals that are going to thrive, are the people who can adapt and who are agile. And so I want people in my organization that can adapt, because I know our business is going to change. So think about what could we be doing in our culture that is either stifling adaptability or promoting it. That's what I'd really want to know that. And lastly, for those of you founders, I get asked a lot of times, Steve, do you have any advice for founders? Yeah, be careful of don't touch my baby syndrome, which is like, you're so passionate, you love your stuff so much that when new people come in and want to try to work it differently or arrange it differently, you react defensively. Be careful, listen, make sure, let them try stuff out. You may have an instinct like, I don't think it's going to work, but you want people, like, you can't know, and you don't know everything. And the best leaders and the brightest leaders are the ones that bring people in to help address the things that they don't know and make the whole value of the organization better. So, in closing, simple questions. What kind of culture do you want is really about what culture do you do your best work? And that was probably the best question we ever asked our employees. Are you as productive as you can be? And if you're not, why? What can we do to untangle, to block and tackle all the things in your way? It's too noisy, the cubicles suck, it's too loud, whatever it is, your commute's horrible. We want to try to address that for you, okay? So I encourage you to go out there and make it your competitive advantage. So Juliana, that's it for my main presentation. And I'd like to shift to any questions that people have. And I want to thank all of you guys for putting up with me getting all wound up on this topic.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. There's a million questions. I don't really know where to start. But let me start with the first. So what companies are built to last?
Well, if you were to ask me what companies I see building to last, again, I'm thinking of companies today like an Amazon. I think they're really trying to build to last really hard. I think Tesla is not in the car business. They've made us realize they're in the energy business now. I think they're building to last. I think, but the list is short for me, honestly. I think a wake-up call for American business leaders, particularly in big companies, is that in the last 20 years, the company in the world that's lost the most value is General Electric.
Yeah.
And that was the company that in the 80s and 90s, every business book was written about. Look at this great leadership and Jack Welch, and we've got the greatest leaders. They just lost $800 billion of value. Like, whoa. So that's a new landscape right now. And I think it just goes to, some companies are being built today to be acquired. Some companies are built for, we're going to have a 5 or 10 year run, and then whatever happens, happens. So, it's an interesting debate, to have. And I'd be curious what you guys think, what companies you see out there that are building with a 100-year vision. And again, I'm not saying you should do it or that it's realistic. It seems kind of unrealistic to me right now because survival is so important. Let's talk about our 20-year plan when the world could be sideways in 3 years. We just saw the world went sideways in 6 months. So it's hard to plan for that, right?
So it seems like cultures that are built to last are companies that build resilience within them, right? And that build the capacity for innovation within them.
That's right. And I think Julia Hartz's comment's really great, is that the cultures that can adapt and evolve and organizations that can adapt and evolve. Like, I had a really great experience at Cisco Systems where we started to realize after acquiring, in the time that I was there, we acquired 50 companies in 4 years. And in some cases, we acquired one person like 3 or 4 times because we'd acquire them and they quit. They didn't want to work in a big company. And the big companies don't always work for everybody, and that's fine. And all of us have to find over the course of our career, when do I feel most inspired? Is it in a small company, a bigger company, a company that's growing, a company that's stabilizing? Am I a turnaround person? Like, what energy, what culture, what leadership style best suits me? And the fact is, we just don't know. Some of us, we can't test out every single job in the world, and there's millions of opportunities. I had a mentoring email today from someone saying, hey, I want to get into sales recruiting. And they just graduated from school. And I said, happy to talk to you about that, but can you first tell me, of all the millions of choices that you have, why is it sales recruiting? So, but what back to the Cisco story, what was interesting about Cisco, what they started to do was say, hey, why don't we take some employees and spin them out and make them a small private company? Why don't we try that? Because we realize our culture isn't right for everybody. And so they built a business model so that if you were acquired and you had great talent, they want to keep you in the family. They put you in a different kind of environment where you're outside of the big Cisco Borg, they called it, and you're on your own. So it's just interesting how companies can take different approaches where they're not trying to be the one that solves everything. Because I do believe, honestly, Juliana, I believe innovation happens better in the open market in smaller spaces than it does in huge, big organizations. That's just my bias over time.
I think that's probably why big companies always want to work with startups, because it brings in innovation. So you mentioned that job descriptions, change pretty much as soon as a person gets hired. What is an alternative to a job description?
So where I think job descriptions are going to go is more sort of, we're going to promise that while you're here, you're going to grow, learn, and develop more than anywhere else you could possibly go. Today, we know that we want you focused on these core things, but we know that that's going to change. And I actually think, we're solving the wrong problem with job descriptions. People know, what exactly am I going to do? I think what people really want to hear is, am I going to grow when I'm with you? Am I going to become more valuable for the future? And I think if we answer that question, that's more important than what the specific thing is. Now, hey, there's a lot of people, I'm sort of a big thinker person, but I know a lot of people like, I want to know exactly what I'm going to do because I don't want you to screw me. So we got to have a contract here, right? So there's sort of a middle ground. Some people need a more granularity. Some people are comfortable with less. But if you go post a job and you're all, overly detailed with the job description, I go, come on, why are you doing that? Because in 2 months, the job is going to be really different. And I don't want someone who's like holding on to something that's not realistic, right?
Yes, I confess I've done that. I've posted job descriptions that describe every month for a year. Okay, so I just want to remind everyone, if you have questions, you can write us on the Facebook Messenger. If you are in the StreamYard, be sure to chat in the private chat and let me know if you want me to put you in the broadcast so you can ask a question directly. If you want to ask a question anonymously, you can also go to the Facebook private chat.
And if we don't get to your question, Juliana, people are welcome to find me on my website, stevecadigan.com, find me on LinkedIn. I hear it's a pretty interesting site. And also you can find me on Facebook too, but I don't use that for business as much.
That's awesome. Okay, here's another question I found interesting. So what was the process to come up with career transformation?
It wasn't planned. I can't give you a formula for that. The career transformation came out of our pain of being incapable of recruiting at the pace that we needed. And it forced a moment of truth for us, what I called in the slides, the defining moment of like, well, why is everyone not accepting to work here? Like, we're cool, we're nice. We got Reid Hoffman, like, woo woo. We got great investors. We're going to have a bright future, we hope. And so it was the failures that caused us to really, really deeply dig into how are we going to solve this? And that got us to, we want to be the best place you ever work. Now, part of the story, which I didn't mention to you, is definitely worth mentioning. And if you've ever seen my former boss and the former CEO of LinkedIn, Jeff Weiner, talk about culture, he will tell you. In our first conversation, and I was the first person he hired, and when he was appointed as CEO, he thought culture, he says, God, when we talk about culture, it makes me kind of want to throw up in my mouth. I'm like, why? And he said, because I was at Yahoo and I saw a great culture get destroyed because the leaders said this about the culture and then they did the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
He goes, I will never let that happen here. And
Mm-hmm.
so I can't say that I was always like, yeah, I've always gotten it about culture. I didn't. I'm a human resource person. I knew culture was important, but I never saw it turn the destiny of a company around until we started making the place great for people to do great work. And we started to see greater people coming to us. We didn't have to hunt them down. And Jeff, one day we're walking around the campus. It was the day a month where people could do whatever they want. Jeff turned to me and he looked at me, he shook his head. He says, I never would have guessed that culture would have been our competitive advantage that would change the destiny of this company. Like, we didn't have a plan to use culture as our competitive advantage. That wasn't part of the scheme. Nobody on that team. We had a head of sales, Mike Gamson, who's now CEO of a company called Relativity, and myself were sort of driving like, let's make this a great place to work. Let's make it a great place to work. And we finally, got some consensus around that and really went all in on it. So it was more sort of responsive defense to a business underperformance on the recruiting side that led to us becoming aware of that, right?
Yeah. And what I really like about the word career transformation is that it has meaning. There's so many corporate culture words that I see companies using, and I think particularly consulting companies are infamous for just using the same words. And it's like, what are you? Trust, loyalty, but really those words just begin to lose their meaning when you start repeating them without actually walking the walk, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I like that. It's unique. Why do you think so many organizations just choose the same words? Is it that we all want the same things, or is it that they're just like, okay, what sounds nice? Like, why do companies fail to really do the deep work of like figuring out, okay, what makes us unique? And if you are doing that work, where do you start? Because it seems so vague and abstract.
Yeah, well, I think, and I'm speaking and thinking about a bigger company now. I love walking into big companies and people say, oh, we got a great culture here. And I said, oh, really? Do you have it defined? And they said, oh, yeah. I said, let me tell you, having never seen your culture, I know what half of your definitions are. And they go, what? Yeah, customer number one, honesty and integrity, trust, get results, and they're like, whoa, how'd you know that? I go, because it's generic. Like, you went to business school, you did what you thought you should do, and there's this belief. And I don't think it's unfounded, and I'm not blaming anybody, but there is magic in culture. But I think it needs to start from, let's not do what everyone else has done. Let's recognize that to unlock greatness here, we need to be clear on who we are and how we get stuff done in a way that's special. And that's what we want to try to build the environment where people can do their best work and where we can get the best possible outcomes for the most possible people, right? And so it's sort of a trap, just like, why do we give grades to kids in school? Like, why are we doing that? Because now we're just promoting, you got to be number one. And I'm like, I don't want someone on my team that thinks they're number one. I want someone on my team that's going to make other people better, not just themselves, So there's so many things, if we look at the whole system that we built for ourselves, that I think deserves some extra care and attention, right?
Yeah. So here's a question that's kind of responding to that. So trust is one of my company values. Many of my employees have had a lot of traumatic experiences in past companies, and building trust is a challenge. What do you recommend?
So trust, this is the great thing I love about coronavirus right now, is like, you only know if that trust really holds up when something goes sideways. Okay, so I got kids and you say our corporate values trust. Can I trust that you're going to appreciate that I need a different work schedule now because I'm working from home with my kids? And for example, like at one point while we've been doing this broadcast, one of my sons said, hey, when are you going to be done? Because I'm hungry. So I've got a little chat box open. Like, it's only when times are tough that we really know whether those things hold up or not, whether people are really going to do what they say. And trust takes a while to earn. So as a leader, what I always look for are problems where I can show my mettle. Like I welcome problems as a leader, because how I solve them is going to show that person where they trust. So for example, in just a small, innocuous, but very common interaction, you're my boss. I'm going to trust you with some information, or you're a
You're
colleague.
hired, by the way.
Yeah.
You're super hired.
But if you're my boss and I trust you with information and it's somewhat sensitive, if I find out you told someone else and you broke that trust, now I know, right? So those are the kinds of things that we find out, right? Very, very quickly. But yeah.
Yeah. And I promise we will get your son food very soon. Just a couple more questions. Okay, now I have to pick, which is hard. But I find this one interesting. So I work for the Air Force. How can I influence a culture? It's very hierarchical.
All right. So it reminds me of I gave a talk last year pre-coronavirus. It was probably like 2,000 people, and it was just about similar stuff that we're talking about now. And someone came up and said, "I work for the government, and I've got all these people that just are on cruise control, and they don't want to perform. Like, how should I deal with that?" And I was like, "Well, can I help you with your LinkedIn profile? Because maybe that's not the right place for you, man." It's like, but everyone has motivators. And here's the thing: if you're in a big system,
yeah,
you can't change the big system. Can you change your team? Can you change your leader? I go, it's sort of culture only holds up as far as your relationship in a big company is your relationship with your boss, or your leader. And so can I influence some positive changes in that dimension that maybe give me a few more things that I want? Is it more freedom? Is it more experience? Is it more authority? Is it more decision-making? Whatever that is. You can't change the big system like that, but you can influence other people. Or I will tell you this, the Air Force has thousands of different pockets and different teams. Just like if everyone thinks on the outside, oh, Google's so great. There's some miserable people in there on some miserable teams. There's some great happy people on some amazing teams, but I can guarantee you not everyone's happy. Same with the Air Force. I'm sure that there are pockets and there are leaders where stuff is happening in a way that's going to make your heart sing more than perhaps where you're stationed now. And I would try to find those places, because maybe that you can still not have to give up your years of service if you have a commitment there, and you can make it work more to your advantage. So that's what I would try to do. Don't get too down by the man. Try to find pockets where you can find a way to carve out something special.
Yeah. And, speaking of the Air Force, can we talk about gender and culture and toxic communication, which often takes place in a lot of male-dominated industries like tech, where if you steal an idea, if you put someone down in a meeting, it's almost like you get promoted, and the long-term effect that has on people's teams, right, and trust, right, and the trauma, like this person just spoke. Listen, I'm trying to build trust, but my employees are jaded. How does gender play a role in the way we communicate and culture?
Absolutely it does, right? And that's one of the things that I think distinguishes me from some other people that could be talking about this. Like, who was the CEO I had with the most slides talking about culture in my presentation? Julia Hartz, right? Yeah. And sometimes when people say, well, there's a CEO and he, a CEO and she, we have so many unconscious biases that it's going to take us a long time to untangle right now. And I think it's got to start with awareness. But listen, this is the best. We're in coronavirus right now, and we're in the worst job market of our lifetimes. It's not going to stay this way. It will end. And when it ends, we have a body of knowledge to see what companies are standing up and doing the right thing, or which companies are going to try to rip people off and charge more for PPEs or charge ridiculous amount for some kind of, coronavirus testing or some kind of antidote. We're going to see. But also, we have the most transparent marketplace for opportunity that's ever existed. And that's good and bad. I can see more places I could go work, people I could work with, companies I could work for, and what they're really like on sites like Glassdoor and Comparably and other places than at any time in history. So if you're feeling like I'm hitting my head against the wall here, good news. You have more choice than you've ever had. Yes, it does mean change. Yes, it's going to be something different. But if it gets you to a happier place, what price are you willing to pay? Or what price are you willing to pay to stay somewhere where you may not be able to forge that change, right? And I know it's easier said than done, But career success is really just a couple of simple things: doing what you want, with who you want, when you want. And if you can work towards that in every different role and take some of the learnings, like, listen, I've learned more about leadership and culture from seeing how it's done wrong than I have from seeing how it's done right. And so, this is why we have the most disengaged workforce in history in the United States right now. The highest number of miserable people. And it kind of doesn't reconcile, because prior to COVID, wages were up, unemployment was down, and people have more choice. So why is everyone so unhappy? Everyone's so unhappy because the value of a skill to you today is this, and it used to be this. I go to school, or I learn something, and I can use that for the rest of my career. And now it's maybe 5 or 10 years. And that doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
So I know it doesn't answer the big question, Juliana, but I do think that could be a whole, series of these kinds of talks around gender and culture. But I want, there's a lot of organizations that are really, really believe in inclusiveness and diversity, but they still haven't found our way. Like, name for me 5 companies killing it, crushing it on gender and inclusive lists right now. Like,
none.
Crickets. Okay, yeah.
Sadly,
did Citigroup just appoint of the first woman CEO ever in financial services just was appointed last week, and it's like, whoa, it's a big story. Well, let's wait for the point where that's not the big story, but it's happening more and more,
Yeah, and the reason I got to the question really is because we're talking about building a culture, and to build a culture, you need communications, and toxic communications is a thing that could prevent culture from emerging. In fact, one of the people who is here with us on StreamYard has I believe she's here, if it's right, Megan. She has a podcast that talks about management horror stories. And Megan, I can unmute you. Just write me in the chat so I can do that.
But you bring up something, Julian. Let me just pause for a second here, because when I think about the culture that I want to be a part of, let me tell you a lesson we learned at LinkedIn. Like, we did actually have a pillar, and Megan will be with you in just a second. One of the pillars was honesty and integrity. Okay? No, it was open and honest. That was it. I'm sorry. And so what started to happen was people were getting into shouting matches, and we're like, what's going on? Like, well, I'm just being open and honest. Like, you can't get upset at me. That's what our culture says. And so we had to go, okay, what we really mean is open, honest, and constructive, okay? Not just like bite someone's head off. But we, unfortunately, I think we're heading down a path right now where having hard conversations is increasingly rare. And we're losing the art of being able to converse with people around subjects that are hard: race, gender, diversity, politics in the office. And people are digging in on social media, and I'm good and you're bad and I'm right and you're wrong and I don't care what the facts are, and this worries me so much. And our over dependence on technology as a form to communicate versus just, let's have a discussion. It's about we, not me, or not you. It's about us together. And we got to find a way to make this work. And like I said, there are more ways you can find places that are healthier climates to do work, and you can find those places more. Now, you may not have the family circumstances or the finances or whatever that you can make a change easily, but the opportunities are greater, and hopefully we'll see more and more healthy companies coming out of this, because more of them are getting exposed on places like Glassdoor, right?
Yeah, that is so true. And speaking of like race and equity, so many people are using that in their culture, but not really walking the walk. In fact, I was talking to a company. It was a fundraising company the other day. I won't name them, but the reason I went to their websites because I need help with fundraising, and one of the things they claim to care about is racial equity and gender equity. And then I got on the call with them and I asked, okay, how many people of color on your team? They're like, oh, we're working on it. And I'm like, okay, but racial equity is apparently one of your values, but you're not hiring people of color. How does this work? It bothers me much more when people claim something they actually don't do it, and when they just don't say it at all. But anyways, that's where I'll end. And I want to add Megan to the conversation, because I know she's filled with brilliant questions about culture and business and management in general.
Megan,
here
I am. Hi. Please excuse the bar in the background.
Although, you're getting me thirsty. Oh, wow.
Okay. So thank you for this presentation and talk about culture. I know, like in my regular day job, trying to adjust and having these conversations around culture is like a daily conversation that we're having now, especially in this particular climate. And I work for the school system, so all types of culture changes and culture shifts have happened just in this whole COVID world. But I guess my question is around middle management and culture. And so how do middle managers keep up with the culture shifts, or if somebody else is making some of the decision making around what the expectations are around the culture, but then it trickles down, right? It's you're trying to trickle it down to about 3 or 4 layers. And then you have this new manager that's now coming on board. How do you get the new manager that's now in this like middle management position aligned with the office culture? And then now that they're managing their own team, like continuing that down.
Yeah. Is this in a single site, multiple site kind of scenario?
Multiple site scenario.
Okay. Yeah. So another layer of complexity.
Just to add to the layer. Yeah.
And we never see them because we're only on a Zoom with them. Yeah. This is hard. I don't know a lot of people that have really nailed this. I think, trying to be as authentic, trying to be as inclusive, and especially when someone is new, the onboarding process is really just try to sort of help them navigate. Sometimes this is the thing that I've found is the case is the informal culture. Mm-hmm. The company says this is, or the school says this is the culture, but how stuff really gets done is this way. And helping them understand, like, okay, you need a question answered. Don't go to, Jim, go to Susan, like who are the right ways of doing it. But, mostly the experience of people in an organization is from the frontline manager, like the individual employee that's getting touched by a boss. Mm-hmm. And they have usually more direct reports, and sometimes usually middle managers don't have that many. That's the place where I want to make sure that they're equipped and they know what they're doing, because mm-hmm. they're touching the experience of more people every day. And I think you need to create a fluid, communication vehicle, whether it's a regular surveys or regular pulsing or regular staff meetings initially to sort of say, okay, what's working well, what could improve? Do you have everything you need? And are you clear? But, trying to make sure that messages are cascading sometimes is hard. And if they're mm-hmm. not, you got to try to jump on that. If you smell something that's not working, but we all, it really is amazing we get along as well as we do, given how we're all from different backgrounds, cultures, families, with different values. And for people from different countries. And one of the things I think that's helped me is having, grown up in South Africa, having lived in countries that hated America, having been in places where when I was in Singapore, we're surrounded by Indonesia, Malaysia, hate America. And we were at war. That was when we were at war in Kuwait. And it was just like, you would get a text message saying, okay, today, know how far you are from the U.S. Embassy if something goes sideways. It's just really, I think it helps inform a greater appreciation for difference of point of view,
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Megan, thank you for being brave and coming out of the StreamYard.
No worries.
I appreciate audiences that are by a bar. I really do.
Yeah, I like interacting and talking to people. So, awesome. And management and leadership structures and the complexities of it all are always interesting to me, for sure.
That's awesome. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm going to let you go, but we just got a really good question in. This is the last one, I promise.
Okay, I got time. If people are not bored and they're not dropping like flies, I can go further.
So here's the last one. So how do I get my engineers to talk about culture?
How do you get them to talk about culture? Okay, well, first you got to lead them to believe it's important to talk about it. And then I guess the question is, well, what do you want to know in talking about culture? So if you're working with the age-old paradigm that a lot of engineers are typically introverted and they're in heaven right now because it's COVID, they can shelter in place. I think it's sort of like, ask them like what part, I would reframe the question and have it, I guess, not be about culture, because that could be pretty direct, and have it be more like, what can I do to help you do your best work? Or what can we do differently that's going to make this more inspirational for you, or allow you to unlock, new possibilities. Usually engineers are usually part of a team, and, having folks work together on that is kind of a good project. So, that usually like sitting across with your arms across them and saying, so tell me about the culture, like that's not going to do it. That's, you formalize the situation. So I would try to find an informal setting, a way of bringing it up that's not, using the word culture, but just more around, are you as productive as you can be? What's different about working here compared to other places? If you could change some things, what would they be? And invite that. But please don't ask that question if you're not ready to do something about it. Because that just gets you back to the companies that say we're all about race, and then actually that's window dressing. We don't really care.
Yeah, or we care about gender equity, just not enough to put a woman on our board or executive team. Yeah. Right. So thank you for being here with us today. I appreciate you, and I'm so grateful. Any last words of advice for people who are starting companies and want to do it on the right foot and set a culture from the beginning, one where all the employees can really collaborate to co-create?
Yeah, you're walking, and again, my incredible respect for all of you that are in that phase. I've not done that. I have enormous respect for you. I think that being mindful of inclusiveness, that people want to help build something great, and set the example yourself. Don't have this conversation if you're not ready to. It's okay. Appreciate and recognize that your culture is being built already by all the things I said that are already happening. And if you have a number of people in your organization, say 5 or 10, you're going to see it. It is much harder getting from like 0 to 250 than it is from 250 to 500. And then it's much harder getting from 500 to 1,000 than it is getting 1,000 to 2,000 employees. So the hard work's now. I do believe if you lay the foundation right, and you're not going to get it right, okay? You are not going to get it right at first. Yeah. This is not about, leaders today cannot be perfect. It's like we have too much information to consume all of it before we have to make a decision about some of this stuff. But listen, you will earn trust by correcting something that's wrong. So, and welcome those opportunities when, hey, we thought this was a good idea. We learned it, we tried it, and the beta says, not good. We're going to change it over here. You think about customers. Customers are far more loyal to the stores or the suppliers that they had a problem with and they fixed it. Okay, than someone they never had a problem with. Same applies to leaders. Your employees will be much more loyal to you if something came up that didn't go the way you wanted it to and you fixed it. So just try. And again, if you've never built a culture, well, you can't get it right the first time, and try to get some people around you, try to get some advisors, try to get other people whose opinions you value to help you think about it very thoughtfully.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's 300 steps in recruitment. You mentioned. What is the first? What is the first?
At least is you got to know what you're hiring. What are we hiring? Really? Do we really need that person?
Okay.
And are they in the right place? And are you sure we don't have someone on the inside of the company that could do that job before we go post some job on the outside?
Yeah. Okay.
I could just go on.
Okay. Cool. Next session. We'll do that next session. We have to get your son some food now. Thank you so much. We appreciate you. Thank you for being here, for taking the time, and for responding to me. Seriously.
Thank you, Juliana. Thank you for what you're doing with Street Entrepreneurs. And I hope that I get a chance to come back on. I have a book that's coming out on the future of work, the end of this year.
Did you figure out the name yet?
And have not figured out the name. We are super close to nailing it. But I hope I get a chance to come back and share some of those insights with the audience sometime around January.
I'm really excited to read it because I want to read something hopeful and thoughtful about the future of work. Whereas everything that I see now is like, we're just, Just give up now, move to Mars.
Well, in California, we can totally relate to that. We couldn't even see out the window last Wednesday. Yeah,
I'm
so
so
dark.
sorry. Stay safe. Stay safe.
Yeah.
Hopefully you're not near the fires.
Nope, we're okay. All right, Juliana, thank you so much. It's been great.
Bye. Take care.